Every revolution starts in the minds of the people. Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen talks freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today is Thursday, February 12th, and the hilarity continues in the Imperial City with the Epstein files providing some more entertainment, specifically the testimony of Attorney General Pam Bondi, which is just hilariously lampooned in several AI videos so far. The best one I've seen has her as a waitress responding to somebody asking, rather reasonable questions about the menu and the specials, and her, screeching, "Will you let me finish my answer?" and et cetera, et cetera. So, as you know, if this isn't your first episode, I don't think there's much true the Epstein files other than overwhelming evidence against Epstein himself, who was convicted once and let off on a light sentence, and then heading for another conviction and life in prison, and then committed suicide or didn't, depending on what side you're on. But I'm still enjoying, I'm a big fan of Thomas Massie. This, I think, has provided him with something to score a lot of political points. Now, the Trump administration, as usual, is trying to primary him for all the wrong reasons, because Massie is one of the only, maybe the only person in Congress who's trying to do the right thing, even where there's overlap between Massie's libertarianism and MAGA. Massie's trying to do the MAGA things. Trump's not trying to do any of them. I guess with the exception maybe of deportations, which he's handling in the worst possible way. So, I'm still enjoying Massie just running circles around Pam Bondi, the federal government in general. I'm sure he's going to get reelected in his campaign and dance on the grave of his primary opponent, further humiliating President Lockdown, who just continues to just rant and rave about Thomas Massie. So anyway, I thought I'd just highlight some of the latest things. So one of the things that Massie brought to light in Congress was that this doesn't even have to do with the cover-up or any sinister corruption in the Department of Justice, but just the pure ineptitude that screams from every corner of the Trump administration. And this has to do with there was a list of names that was sent to the Department of Justice, and it said, "Please do not release these names." And the list looked like 10 or 15 or 20 victims, along with an attorney that may have been representing some or all of them. So what does the Department of Justice do? They release that file unredacted, except one name was redacted. The attorney, the only non-victim on the list. So that's what they did. They released all the victims' names after they, for, I don't know how long it's been, a year, more than a year, have been saying, well, we can't release everything in these Epstein files. We got to worry about the victims. Now they released all their names. So just completely inept. And then more to the point, Massie then moves on to a second document, and I'll post this document on the show notes page. It's an email that names co-conspirators, according to the Justice Department, in the case. Now, these are alleged co-conspirators. Remember that the government alleges a conspiracy in just about every case. Every drug case is a conspiracy, and they do that to get around certain rules of evidence and also to heighten the sentence on people who are convicted. Well, the classic example is they get some poor schlep who's got too much, pot in one bag on his person, and then they call him a drug trafficker. Trafficking is, a very problematic word that's written into a lot of laws to really no good purpose, just to increase the power of the government beyond what we need it to have to dispense justice. But I'll put that aside. Talked about that in the last case regarding trafficking and prostitution cases and those kinds of things. But in any case, this document says, here is the info we have on the co-conspirators. Let me know if you have any questions. Now, this is an email written from redacted to redacted. We know it was August 15th, 2019. So they're getting ready, for the case, for a conspiracy case. And they have a list of primary co-conspirators, the first three of which are redacted. And they all indicate, hey, we're negotiating with them and maybe trying to get them to cooperate at the time. So that might be why their names are redacted, because they might still be trying to negotiate with them. But it says like the different things they allegedly did. Like the first one, it says arranged massage appointments from New York City. So that's what they're alleging this person's part in the conspiracy to traffic minors was, arranging the massage appointments. As we know, that's either Epstein probably got some massages that turned sexual, or that was a euphemism, kind of like, showers for the Jews with the Nazis type thing. I don't know. And then it says redacted was redacted's direct supervisor and had her set up massage appointments, do background research on the girls, make follow-up phone calls to confirm appointments, and told her to instruct the girls she spoke with to recruit more girls. So remember, these are all things the government hasn't proven, but at least there's some charge here. There's some thing that they allege makes this person a co-conspirator. And there's details like that in the next two. Again, those names are redacted. And then the fourth one is Ghislaine Maxwell, and everyone knows who she is, already convicted. And it, gives a summary of the action she took to play her part in the conspiracy. And then there's a second heading that says secondary co-conspirators. So these, you interpret as you like why they have a list of primary co-conspirators and secondary co-conspirators. I'm interpreting that to mean more minor involvement or less direct involvement. The first one listed as someone named Jean-Luc Brunel, owner of the M2 model agency. It says they're in contact with his attorneys. A subpoena has been served. There is limited evidence regarding his involvement. So that's this Brunel guy. Then there's a redacted person, currently living in London, has been there since approximately 2011, not a U.S. citizen. FBI drafted an FDR requesting assistance from Legal London to arrange an interview. Currently, there is limited evidence regarding her involvement, but information indicates she facilitated massage appointments. So this is a woman. She's living in London. She's not a U.S. citizen. And there's some evidence that she helped set up massages for Epstein. And then the third one is this Leslie Wexner, whom Massey calls out in the hearing, in the testimony of Bondi. And he says, you redacted his name and he's listed as a co-conspirator. So Massey, he hedges here. He doesn't say secondary, and he doesn't, give more details, like there is limited evidence regarding his involvement. And unlike the one before that, it doesn't list any actions that Wexner allegedly took to be a participant in this conspiracy. So far as we know, he hasn't been accused by anybody of a victim of having sex with them when they were underage. So all we know about Wexner, and so here's what I did. I asked both Grok and ChatGPT, out of all the Epstein files so far released, which person has the most prosecutable case against them? And this Wexner was the one that Grok picked. And I said, okay, what's the evidence against Wexner? And it said he's named as a co-conspirator. I said, okay, well, what evidence supports the charge that he was a co-conspirator? He had vast, financial dealings with Epstein. I said, okay, what evidence of his involvement in trafficking minors is there? And then it just repeats this line from the memo. The FBI memo says there's limited evidence regarding his involvement. So now I'm going on the attack with Grok. I started out trying to cast the net wide and see what we could get out of him. Whatever. And I said, well, then you're saying there is no evidence. Somebody named him a co-conspirator and nobody's come up with any evidence to support that charge. And I get back that there is limited evidence. Okay. So, I mean, this is what Grok's saying is the best case. And this is the one that Massey chose to mention. He didn't mention anyone else's case. As far as I know this is the whole testimony. So I don't know. No prosecutor is going to win a conviction against Wexner with that. No accusations, no victims. His name's on a list, and he did a lot of business with Epstein. So we have lots of people who had lots of reasons for being involved in with Epstein. Some of them are in the world of finance, which Epstein's financial wizardry, I think, is vastly overrated based on what I heard him say. That interview that he had about the 2008 financial crash, where he just basically blames the Community Reinvestment Act, which played a part, but was by no means the major part, a major reason for that. So he wasn't too impressive to me, to be honest with you, but whatever. Who am I, right? But that's Grok. Grok picks Wexner. Grok can't make a case. Grok can't even convince me that you could get an indictment from a grand jury, and a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich, as we know. So ChatGPT comes up with Prince Andrew. And Prince Andrew, I said, okay, so what's the evidence against Prince Andrew? And it said that the Virginia Giuffre, who I think most people are familiar with, she was an alleged victim of Epstein and others. She made many accusations. She is no longer, I think she committed suicide, unfortunately. And I think some people even dispute that she was, knocked off so that she couldn't testify against other people. But she accused Prince Andrew of having sex with her when she was a minor. And I said, okay, well, we got something there. And I said, well, what other evidence is there besides just her word, which Prince Andrew denies? He says, no, that never happened. And it said, well, there's hundreds of records of Prince Andrew being on the Epstein's plane, flight logs and that kind of thing, and maybe visits to the island, whatever. And I said, okay, well, I mean, there's hundreds of people for whom that would be true. Do any of the flight logs or any other travel information place Prince Andrew and this Virginia Giuffre in the same place at the same time, especially at a time when she says any of these crimes happened? And it basically said no. I asked several different ways because I was getting these vague answers. I'm saying, well, look, you should be able to tell if there's any dates to any of these crimes, whether we could nail down, yeah, Prince Andrew was on a plane to the island, arrived there while she was there, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't mean he did it, but that's some supporting evidence. We can put him at the scene of the crime. And basically, ChatGPT said, no, we can't. All we got is evidence that he traveled on the plane a lot. So what other evidence do you have? They don't have any. So again, I mean, if a prosecutor goes in and let's say Miss Giuffre was still alive and she testified and then Prince Andrew denied it and there's no other evidence and this all happened, many years ago, I think it's a tough case. Now, number one, a jury could convict anyway, wrongfully or rightfully, even if the evidence isn't there. And also what could happen is upon direct and cross-examination, one of the two of them could come off as lacking credibility, get caught in obvious lies, contradictions, testimony could go badly for Prince Andrew. And then the jury might decide he's lying and I believe her, or vice versa, right? So it's never a great thing in cases like this. Most sexual crimes occur with no other witnesses. And then you have a one word against another. If there's evidence of violence and the victim goes right to the hospital, that helps the case. But of course, this would all be years later. And it's problematic both ways. I mean, you don't want to see the guilty get off, and you don't want to see an innocent man convicted, especially of something like this, which is about the worst thing you can be convicted of. I mean, you get treated worse in prison for this than for murder, which is, yeah, well, we all do it, right? But they don't like child molesters. And I shouldn't even be that loose with the term, or even, people who have sex with underage post-pubescent women. So, and it's really, there's a stigma about it. I think you could get past a murder if you're repentant, but if you're falsely convicted of a sexual crime, I think that kind of hangs with you forever. Even if you are repentant, whatever, you just never get rid of it. So, it's a horrible thing. And there were victims in this case. Again, nobody's disputing that Epstein didn't do this, but there's a real danger for people to be wrongly convicted. This whole thing has the kind of mass hysteria that we've talked about before with the Jerry Sandusky case. The mob wants blood, and it's going to get it. And this whole thing with the client list, right? There is no client list, that's for sure. Now, there could be some of these men who partied with Epstein, and then he had these underage girls around, and, they had sex with them at the party, they snuck off to a bed, whatever could have happened. We just don't have any evidence of that right now. And, I don't think we're going to find any, even if everything is unredacted. Now, you have to also remember that Epstein was mixed up with intelligence one way or another. So again, to me, when they say, oh, that's classified, 90% of the time, that just means it's saving somebody from embarrassment. And then the other 10%, it might be like some undercover agent where if you release it, it blows his cover and he gets killed, right? Now, he might be up to no good for the U.S. government in some other place, but he also might be just a spy. And hey, spies are a fact of life, okay? So other governments spy on ours, we spy on other governments. It's just the way it is. So you don't want to see those people get killed or compromised. I mean, I'd like to see no spies and no governments, but hey, every day you can't be a Sunday. So, that's where we are. And I mean, the funny thing about it is, what's really ironic to me is I have a feeling Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and Dan Bongino are all telling the truth about this. And they built up the expectations themselves so much for this Epstein client list. And just to review, remember, it turned out from Epstein soliciting prostitution from both adult females who are on the young side, 19, 20, young, and underage females, which is illegal, right? But, when you say it went from that, that's what he was actually convicted of in 2008, 7 or 8. And that's what he was charged with again here this time around. But it goes from that to trafficking children. Okay. Now the trafficking term is the legal term, for the crime. If it's an adult, you have to coerce. If you just solicit a prostitute, I guess that's not considered trafficking. That's just solicitation of prostitution. But if you somehow coerce the adult prostitute, you make her do it, you kidnap her, you use some kind of threat of violence or violence itself to get her to do something. I mean, in the moment, I guess if you're using violence, that would be rape, but maybe you're coercing her in some other way to do prostitution for you. That's trafficking. And then any solicitation of a minor is trafficking. Okay. But I think when the average layperson hears the word trafficking, they picture an 8-year-old handcuffed to the door handle of a van, a van full of Girl Scouts being smuggled over a border and, sold into child sex slavery. That's, and I think that's what's in the minds of a lot of people. which is why they're so upset about all this. And that's just not what happened. And that doesn't excuse, 14, 15-year-old girls, just no excuse for that, right? And should be prosecuted wherever there is reasonable, substantial proof. I mean, you got to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt to convict. There's got to be probable cause that somebody did that. So we got that on Epstein. He's convicted. Now he's dead. They got that on Maxwell. She's convicted. She's in jail. They've got these other staffers for Epstein that it sounds like they're still working with to see if they're going to either just let him take a plea. They want to see what else they can get out of him. Can they get anything on anybody else? I think that's where they are with some of those unindicted, so far, co-conspirators. So, and we'll see. And maybe they'll get enough on some third party beside Epstein and his enablers who did one of these things. And if there's solid proof there, then I hope that person's convicted. But, again, to summarize, if that were to happen, and let's just say they got a dozen people and convicted them all, and we all felt pretty good that none of these were wrongful convictions, they really got them. That's good for the victims. I want to see justice for the victims, but it's not going to make a difference in any of our lives. And I guess this is the overall frustration with this whole Epstein thing going back like 10 years, is that and even before it was Epstein, it was the Pizzagate and whatever, and this obsession with pedophiles and thinking like everybody's a pedophile, and maybe everybody is, but this is not going to make any of our lives better. It's not going to change our political system. I want drastic changes to the political system. I want the federal government to stop robbing working people of all of their potential savings through this scam called Social Security, to keep them in the working class and prevent them from becoming part of the ownership class. That's what Social Security does. That's why I'm always at it. It's the worst program of all of them domestically. And I want the empire taken apart. I want troops home. We have 200,000 of them all over the world, costing us $1 trillion a year. And I'd like that broken up. I'd like the Republic back, at least. I mean, I'd like more than the Republic back. I'd like better than the old Republic back, but I'll settle for the classical liberal limited government republic that didn't go abroad looking for monsters to destroy, that stayed out of foreign wars and pretty much invented the whole modern world as we know it today, until, the progressive movement started to bite into all that innovation. So that's what I'd like back. Convicting 100 people, famous people, of these sexual crimes is not going to make that happen. Not going to move the ball 1 yard down the field in that cause. Okay. And that's why, okay, if this makes the administration look, not even just the Trump administration, but if it makes Washington look bad, it's fine with me, but it's not really helping anything. And there is the danger of wrongfully convicting some people of about the worst thing you can be wrongfully convicted of. So in other news, I mentioned Iran. So, I mean, that looks like that's just about over, right? For now. And a lot of people, including me, were very concerned that Iran could get very ugly. One thing the empire knows, they've been rattling their sabers at Iran for all of my life, just about, and especially since the George W. Bush administration. So I remember there was kind of a period where we didn't hear much about Iran, maybe in the 90s, and maybe because Clinton was president. And then Bush got in there, and all of a sudden they're part of the axis of evil and blah, blah, blah. And of course, this is all on behalf of Israel. And ever since then, we get another Democrat. He's doing the same thing, but he makes this deal with Iran, which sounded pretty reasonable, gets them to agree that they're not going to make a nuclear weapon, which they weren't trying to make anyway, which even our own CIA confirmed they're not trying to make anyway. And then Trump, of course, gets rid of it, right? So, Horton's Law, the great Scott Horton's Law of elections, all of the good promises will be broken, all the bad promises will be kept. And then there's Mullen's corollary, which is that the few good things that were done by the previous administration will be reversed and all the bad things will be continued. And of course, the few good things that Obama did, and there weren't many, was the Iran deal to just put that to bed and opening relations with Cuba, at least somewhat. And of course, those were immediately reversed by Trump. And Trump, the one good thing he probably did in his first term, I mean, he signed the tax cut and then totally screwed the pooch in 2020, President lockdown. The moment we needed a fighter, and he just rolled over for the pipsqueak Fauci. Then he gave him a medal. But anyway, one of the good things he did, I think, was that remain in Mexico policy. It's like if you want to claim you're a refugee, some people legitimately are. A whole lot of people aren't. They never show up for their hearing. They just say that because they know that they won't be deported until their case is reviewed. Then they just don't show up for the review. So we said, okay, well, if you want to do that, you got to stay in Mexico while we review it. So I thought that was pretty good. And of course, that was reversed immediately by Biden when he got in there. So Mullen's corollary has held, since I came up with it. But so, I mean, this has all turned out in Iran a lot like the John Bolton led dust up with Iran in Trump's first term. I want maximum pressure, but I don't want a war. So first of all, I don't understand what the pressure is. You send all these military ships and planes and everything there, but you're telling them you don't want a war. So, well, what are the ships for then? It doesn't really make much sense. I kind of believe Trump is sincere that he doesn't want a war. But, I mean, it's gotten so ridiculous. He said that he totally obliterated their nuclear program. And now 6 months later, we have to send all these ships over there and threaten them and be on the verge of a war because of their nuclear program. And then they up the ante to they can't even have their non-nuclear missiles, right? Which is their only defense against Israel. So it's something they can't sign. And I'm going to do a separate episode just on that and the similarity to what Austria-Hungary did to Serbia in 1914 with the ultimatum it gave them, leading to World War I. So that's too long a story to go in now, but there's a little teaser. We did the Trump administration on behalf of, well, I should say in this case, when it comes to the Middle East, the Netanyahu administration in Washington made them an offer that they couldn't accept rather than couldn't refuse, just like Austria-Hungary did to Serbia in 1914, because they want to escalate. But the bottom line is, it would take a lot more. It would be a much bigger commitment for the U.S. to go to war with Iran than it would be to go to war with Iraq as it did, or Afghanistan. And I don't totally understand why, since Iran is destitute and their military budget is under $20 billion a year and the United States is 1,000 trillion, but it goes back to Russia. Okay, Russia's is under 100 billion. I think they might have just crossed 100 billion to like 110 billion or something. But it's still like about at 1/10 of the US, but they're still able to defeat Ukraine with all of NATO backing them. So somehow the money is a little screwy. I mean, I think, most of the US military spending is just a ripoff. But there's some disparity there between comparing budgets and the capabilities of the subject country. So Russia is, of course, an example of that. So it doesn't look like we're going to a war with Iran. I don't know what the plan is with the Middle East and Iran and Gaza. I guess it's just the same old year after year, decade after decade. They're a threat. They're about to get a nuclear weapon. We got to do all this stuff. And it never comes to war with them, thank goodness. But, it's not like there's no cost to any of this. And it would be great if we could just, call it quits with this country that, we overthrew their government 73 years ago. So that's my math right? Yeah, 20 26 plus 47. And it's not been good ever since. And then we put the Shah in to replace Mossadegh. We kept him in there, supported him. They didn't like him. They finally overthrow him. They take our hostages because as a strike back for what they said was the brutal dictatorship of the Shah. And then, of course, ever since then, we've been, trying to get them back for that. We had that whole proxy war in the 80s where we're funding both them and Iraq against each other. That's a real nice thing to do. And so these people don't like us, and they may be bad people, but we've given them plenty of reason not to call us the great Satan. And then, likewise, they do a lot of what they would call patriotic things in the Middle East, and we call terrorism. So, who's the terrorist depends on which side you're on. So in any case, it looks like nothing much happening there. We had the whole neocon fiction about them killing 40,000 civilians in something like 3 days. Now, I mean, I don't know. Does anyone believe anything they hear about? This is the babies in incubators all over again. Of course, we want to go to war, so we're going to put out this ridiculous thing, and they'll show you a picture of, I don't know, 25 body bags. Look, 40,000 bodies. Okay, is that picture even from Iran? Is it from this decade? And where's the other, 39,975 bodies? Because I see 25, and I'm suspicious. Okay. Call me Mr. Glass Half Empty, but I don't believe anything the government says. In fact, I just default to the government's lying until there's compelling evidence that it's telling the truth. So in any case, that's where we are. As far as I know with Iran, this Epstein thing has taken over everything, and we'll see where we go next. Trump has stood down from Minneapolis on the whole dust up there. Not sure why he's not moving. If his goal is mass deportation, what about red states where no one's resisting? I mean, why aren't you moving tens of thousands of people out of red states every week? I don't know. I don't know that it's possible. I mean, I don't think it's possible to do mass deportations, and that puts aside whether we even should do it. But obviously, if numbers were your concern and you wanted to get that number down, you would go for the low-hanging fruit. I think Texas has some illegal immigrants, and you don't have this kind of communist resistance there. Maybe you do in Austin, but just really dumb, just really inept. I mean, even when they're trying to do stuff that isn't necessarily going to benefit us either, they can't do it right. So, we got 3 years to go. That's the other thing that just surprised. Talking to a friend today, and I said, well, we got at least 2.5 years. And he said, we have 3 years to go. It's February 2026. We got 2026, 2027, 2028. Maybe they'll turn it around at some point. They're probably going to lose Congress, at least the House, in will it be? 8 months, 9 months, November, 8.5. So whatever they're going to do positive, they should probably try and do it in the next 8.5 months. And they might be understandably frustrated by this whole Epstein thing where, their own people who they appointed made a big deal out of this and then got into office and might have found out it was all bullshit. And now they don't know what to say. They don't want to lie because they don't have anything to give the crowd of what it wants. And telling the truth has just gotten them beat over the head. So like I said, it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of guys and gals. I love seeing them twist. I think it's a big waste of time. I don't think any convictions are going to come out of it, and hopefully no wrongful convictions. And maybe they will catch one or two people who had a little too much fiesta and hooked up with an underage girl. Maybe they'll catch a couple of those people. There was no trafficking ring the way you and I would use the term. There's no client list. So I think they should just keep asking them for it for the rest of the year and watch them keep saying we don't have anything. And why Pam Bondi just can't come out and say it. She should have just come out instead of screeching at everybody and just said what I said. Congressman Massey, tell me which person from the Epstein files that you've reviewed I have the best case against, and tell me why, and see what they say. Because I don't think they have a case against anybody they can go to court with and win, but too inept to come up with that answer. The worst answer is no administration's been more transparent than the Trump. Oh my God. Talk about not reading the room. Nobody wants to hear the RNC talking points or Trump's talking points. Every time you ask him a question, he's got to review his wonderful list of accomplishments, most of them in his imagination. Nobody wants to hear that. They want blood. Or give them a good answer why you haven't prosecuted anybody. I don't have a case. If you think I have a case, tell me what it is. Tell me who the person is. Tell me the evidence you found, and I'll tell you whether I think I can win a case or not. That's the real answer, and you're never going to hear it from the clown show. So let's keep watching, folks. It is a lot of fun, and we'll see what comes next on the other side of mass hysteria. And as I've always said, if you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, please do. Let a friend know about it and share it on social media. Every little bit helps, and I thank you for listening. See you next time.
The war of ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.